In the dead of winter, silence is never truly empty. Deep in Superior National Forest, a child rescues two half-frozen dogs. But these are not ordinary strays. Their scars and obedience tell another story, one tied to military secrets and cartel operations. Soon, red-blue lights flash outside her cabin, but even the law hides treachery. When her Marine protector discovers the truth, the fight becomes personal. Family loyalty betrayal. Everything collides in a house swallowed by snow. What secrets lie inside the collars of those dogs? Watch to the end, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Snow came down, the way old men talk about it sideways. Relentless, a white hush that swallowed the two-lane road and laid its hand against the windows of the Davis cabin on the edge of Superior National Forest. Inside, the lights flickered and steadied, and 6-year-old Emily Davis knelt on the braided rug by the front door, her breath fogging the glass as she listened. The storm had a voice low and patient, testing every nail in the wood. She should have been asleep. Instead, she was counting the seconds between the wind's long exhale and the house's answering creak, the way she once counted her mother's steps down the hall at night. Her father's old toolbox sat by the fireplace. Above it, a photograph of Laura Davis smiled down sunlight in summer braiding through her hair. The fire snapped, then shrank as if bowing to the cold. That was when Emily heard it, a faint, high thread of sound that didn't belong to the storm. Not branches, not ice shifting on the eaves. A whimper, then a scrape. She slid the deadbolt with 2 hands and cracked the door an inch. Cold barged in, fierce and clean, carrying the smell of pine and iron. 2 shapes huddled on the porch, German shepherd's fur rimed with ice bodies pressed into the corner out of the wind. One lifted his head, calm brown eyes meeting hers, not pleading so much as asking. The other kept his gaze on the yard as if he were guarding a perimeter only he could see. "Okay," Emily whispered, as if surrendering to something bigger than the rules. She dragged the door wider, and the dogs moved with surprising precision, one stepping in, pivoting to face the yard, the other turning his shoulder against the door to nudge it shut. The warm air seemed to lift them. The frost began to melt along their backs in thin silver threads. Emily fetched towels from the bathroom and a bowl of water from the kitchen. The dogs drank, not greedily. The one with a grizzled ear took exactly 3 mouthfuls and then lifted his head to scan the room, ears tilted to the wind. The other, broader through the chest, sat between Emily and the window, as if that were his post. "You're good boys," she said, voice catching on the word boys, because that was how her mother had said it when their first puppy tumbled after a red ball in a sunlit yard 2 summers ago. She set a folded towel by the hearth. The dogs shared it without jostling, shoulder to shoulder, their bodies curved like parentheses around her. She could feel their heat through the blanket pulled up to her chin, a sturdy warmth that reached deeper than the fire. On the brass collar of the broader dog, the clasp had snapped. A small, sheared piece of black plastic clung to it, split down the middle like a broken tooth. Emily traced the edge and felt a hidden ridge beneath the fur, something that shouldn't have been there. "That looks like it hurts," she murmured, pressing her palm softly above it. The dog flicked his ear in acknowledgement, then put his head down on his paws. The wind rose. A branch skittered across the roof. The lights dipped and returned. Emily's heart steadied against the measured breathing on either side of her. The clock over the mantel clicked toward 10. On the kitchen table, beside a mug with a ring of cocoa at the lip, sat the emergency list her father had written in block letters the day the first flurries fell. Flashlight. Extra batteries. Neighbors' numbers. Don't open the door. She'd opened the door. And yet, what else could you do when something shivered at the edge of your world and asked not with words but with a soft sound you felt in your chest? She thought of Laura's sayings that still lived in the house, the way Cinnamon clung to the old wooden spoon. Kindness is a door you open even when the wind is bad. Emily curled closer to the dogs. The one with the grizzled ear kept watching the yard. the other turned slightly at each passing gust, as if reading a code only storms wrote. Sometime after 10, the furnace clicked off and didn't click back on. The silence it left behind was larger than noise. Emily counted 1, 2, 3, nothing. The dogs stiffened, then settled again, readjusting their weight in such quiet choreography that Emily had the strange thought they had practiced it elsewhere with someone who had patience and a whistle. She put another log on the fire like her father showed her, opened the flue, and watched the flame climb. She felt capable and very small at the same time, the way you feel when you stand on the lake in January and hear the ice sing beneath your boots. The knock came at 10:30. Not loud. Firm. Once. Then again. Emily stood the blanket dropping to her ankles. The dogs rose in unison, not a sound from either of them. The broader one shifted to her left, the grizzled ear to her right, their bodies creating a narrow corridor that guided her toward the door while holding the room like a line. Her fingers found the chain. "Who is it?" she asked, and her voice came out like a new penny, bright and thin. "Jack Turner." A man answered. His words carried the clipped cadence of someone who had been taught to speak under stress, clear, minimal calm. "I'm a Marine. My vehicle's stuck in the drift at the pull-off. I saw your light. I'd be grateful for a phone, ma'am." Emily felt the dogs lean into the moment. The broader one's ears tipped forward. The other's gaze slid to the window and back to the door, as if he were checking an invisible checklist. "I don't have a phone that works right now," Emily said. Because it was true. The storm had eaten the line by afternoon. "All right," the man said, no surprise in it, only the steadying acceptance of bad weather and bad luck. "Is there an adult with you?" "No," she said, and the word left her mouth and hung in the cold seam by the door. He took a beat. "My ID is in my left breast pocket," he said. "If you slide the chain and open a crack, you can see it. I'll stay back. I don't want to scare you." The dogs moved before she did 2 steps forward as one shoulders aligned, heads tilted. Emily slid the chain. The door opened a hand's width, then 2. Wind sprang through a fistful of snowflakes scattering on the floorboards. A man stood on the porch, his parka glazed with ice, the brim of his beanie white with frost. He had the kind of stillness that never tries to prove anything. He held his hands out, palms visible, and angled his shoulder so the laminated card faced the light. U.S. Marine Corps. Turner Jack. The photograph was the same face under the winter wear, sharper in cold eyes, a calm gray blue. The dogs took him in like a test. He didn't look at them yet. He kept his gaze at Emily's height, steady, a little softened by concern. "I can wait in the truck," he said, as if offering her a way to say no without shutting the door in his face. "If the wind drops, I'll dig out." "You'll freeze," she said, and the truth of it embarrassed her as if she were scolding a stranger. A ghost of a smile touched one corner of his mouth. It wasn't humor so much as appreciation for her clarity. "Maybe." "I burn slow," he said, then caught himself. "It's a Marine joke." He glanced down finally at the dogs, and something in his expression altered with a flicker that was there and gone. Not fear. Recognition. He lowered his hands a fraction, not enough to threaten, just enough to let his wrists relax. "May I step into the rug?" he asked. "I'll stay by the door." Emily looked at the dogs. The grizzled ear slid his gaze to her, then back to the man, as if to say, "This is your house, but we are with you." The broader one exhaled a soft huff through his nose and sat, muscles coiled but permissive. She opened the door. Jack Turner stepped onto the rug and closed the door with a practiced motion that kept the wind from slamming it. He didn't stomp snow off his boots. He brushed them gently on the coarse mat so he wouldn't spray slush. The small courtesies of a man trained to move through other people's space without leaving damage. "Thank you," he said. "You did the right thing with the fire. Got any extra blankets?" She nodded toward the hall closet. He retrieved 2 set, one by the door for his shoulders and the other near the hearth without asking, as if the room had briefed him. He inspected the furnace thermostat with a quick look, but didn't touch it. "Power's riding the edge. We'll work with the fireplace." He crouched and fed the flame a split log, and the light climbed the planes of his face, softening the lines of windburn at his cheeks. The dogs watched. When he reached for the iron poker, the broader dog's ear ticked a fraction. Jack angled the tool away, keeping the motion smooth, and the dog settled. "They have training," he said quietly, more to the room than to her. "It looks like they remember all of it." "Were they yours?" Emily asked, startled by the question even as she asked it. The dogs lifted their heads as if they'd heard a word without sound. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at the broken clasp on the broader dog's collar, thumbed the plastic ridge with a practiced gentleness that spoke of time spent earning trust from wary creatures. He didn't push further, not yet. Instead, he moved his hands back into view and sat on the floor at a respectful distance, boots crossed at the ankle forearms resting on his knees. "What are their names?" he asked. "I called them Rex and Duke," Emily said. "Only for tonight. Strong names," he said. Wind combed the pines and rattled the back door. The house answered with a small shudder. Jack's eyes flicked to the side window, then to the front door, mapping entry points, not out of paranoia, but duty. He breathed in, long and even, as if syncing his pulse to the rhythm of the room. "Emily," he said softly, weighing whether to ask the next question. "Did you notice anyone near the property before the storm hit? A truck parked wrong lights where there shouldn't be." She shook her head. "Only the snow, and the sound they made at the door." Jack nodded, not pushing. The dogs blinked slow, their bodies heavy with tiredness, but never fully letting go. Emily felt the kind of safety that sits beside fear without arguing with it. She leaned her shoulder against Rex and looked into the fire. The storm pressed its whole palm against the house and then eased. Somewhere far down the road, a plow groaned metal against ice. The sound arrived thin and late like memory. Jack's jaw worked once thinking. He reached into his pocket, withdrew a small multi-tool, and set it not opened on the table by the door, the way a man sets down his hat in a church. The gesture said, "I am here to help." The dog's eyes followed, satisfied. The photograph above the toolbox caught a flare of firelight. Laura's smile blooming for an instant on the glass. Emily's throat tightened, then loosened the way thaw moves through a frozen pipe. "My mom used to say storms end faster if you talk to them," she said. Jack looked at the window, then at her. "Then we'll keep talking," he answered. "We'll give this one a reason to pass." And the house, which had learned to speak in creaks and sighs, settled around the three of them, the man by the door, the child on the rug, and the two quiet sentinels who had stepped out of the white night and made a circle warm enough to outlast the wind. The night did not quiet down the way storms usually did after midnight. Instead, it held a peculiar heaviness, as if the trees themselves were waiting. Emily had dozed against Rex's flank while Duke kept his head lifted, eyes glowing faint in the firelight. Jack Turner had stayed seated near the door every so often, adjusting the blanket over his shoulders, gaze scanning the frame of the windows as though rehearsing responses in silence. He had spent years inside perimeters that turned dangerous at the smallest sound, and he recognized the way animals held themselves when they knew something moved beyond ordinary weather. It happened just past 11 when the sharp metallic rasp of pressure against glass came from the rear of the cabin, not loud, but distinct enough to cut through the groan of the wind. Duke rose in a single fluid motion, his growl low, and controlled a professional warning more than an instinctive bark. Rex followed half a step later, both dogs sprinting through the hallway with an accuracy that startled Emily into waking. Jack was already moving his hand lifted to calm Emily, his other hand sliding the chain from the doorframe before following the dogs down the hall. The sound repeated metal against frame, then a quick crack as if a tool had slipped. Before Jack reached the kitchen, the dogs had hurled themselves at the back door, the impact thunderous. A man's startled breath echoed outside, followed by retreating boots crunching in snow. Duke's bark split the night like an alarm, Rex's deeper snarl reinforcing it, the combined noise carrying authority. Jack pushed through to the kitchen just in time to see the curtain stir from the draft through the loosened window catch. He slid to the sill, eyes narrowing, and peered into the white churn of the storm. A shadow broke across the tree line, swift and purposeful, disappearing into drifts that swallowed sound. Jack opened the door a few inches, letting the dogs surge forward into the yard. They did not chase far, only to the tree line, then circled back their training, keeping them close to the house rather than risking distance. Emily appeared behind him in the doorway, clutching her blanket, eyes wide. Jack pulled the door shut, locked the deadbolt, and drew her gently away. "It's all right," he said in the even tone Marines used when calm was more important than truth. They scared him off. But his own thoughts were less forgiving. He waited until Emily was settled back by the fire, then reached for the flashlight and returned to the back step with Rex and Duke at his heels. He crouched the beam falling across the snow. The prints were clear, sharp impressions pressed deep into powder. He followed them for a dozen yards until the storm blurred the trail, but what froze him was not the direction. It was the shape, narrow with a defined tread pattern. He shifted the light closer, his breath fogging above the beam. The sole showed crosshatch and heel strike, a distinct design he had worn himself more times than he cared to count. They were not hunting boots, not the thick rubber soles of a farmer, nor the workman's lugs of someone local. They were issue boots, military. More than that, he recognized the precise model, lightweight tactical soles favored by reconnaissance and special units. Jack straightened slowly, the flashlight beam stretching thin in the storm. His chest tightened with recognition, and in the cold air, his training returned in full weight. Whoever had approached this house was not a lost traveler, nor a common burglar taking advantage of a storm. This was someone who moved like him, equipped like him, prepared like him. Back inside the cabin, he brushed snow from his gloves, carefully setting the flashlight on the table. He leaned down and rubbed Rex's shoulder, feeling the tension still humming under the thick coat. Duke stood guard by the window, ears fixed forward. Emily asked in a small voice, "Was it just a man from town?" Jack looked at her, choosing his words carefully. "Not from town," he said softly. "But he's gone for now." She seemed to accept the answer, though her fingers curled tighter into the blanket. Jack's eyes flicked to the photograph above the mantel again. Laura's smile frozen in a summer frame, and he felt the old Marine instinct settle into his muscles like armor. He was no longer a visitor taking refuge. He was now standing post. The storm rattled the shutters as if to remind him that cover was thin. He made quiet rounds of the house, checking every lock and every hinge, reinforcing what he could with simple wedges of wood and the heavy toolbox against the back door. The dogs followed each step, silent shadows echoing his intent. When he returned to the fire, Emily was fighting sleep, her eyelids heavy but unwilling to close. Jack sat across from her so that when she finally drifted, the last thing she saw would be someone watching the room. Outside, the tracks were already vanishing under fresh snow, but the image of those soles stayed sharp in his mind. They belonged to men trained never to leave marks unless they wanted them found, which meant this one wanted him to know. As the firelight sank and the house breathed into silence again, Jack understood the truth. Danger had not passed with the storm. It had only announced its arrival. The storm pressed down heavier as midnight slid into the slow hours before dawn, the kind of silence that carries weight rather than comfort. Jack Turner sat near the fireplace where the embers smoldered, his boots planted solid on the rug, his eyes moving between the girl, the dogs, and the windows that separated them from the dark. Emily had drifted into a shallow sleep, curled against Rex, her breath rising in small clouds against his fur. Duke remained alert by the door, his chest rising steady, but his ears tuned to every sound outside. Jack reached for the blanket draped over the chair and gently tucked it across Emily's shoulders. As he did, his hand brushed against the broken clasp on Rex's collar. The metal edge scraped his knuckle, and for the first time he studied it fully under the flicker of firelight. The clasp was not just snapped, it was sheared in a way that suggested force or deliberate removal. Hanging from it was a sliver of black plastic no bigger than a thumb, partially concealed by the thick coat of fur. Jack narrowed his eyes gently, parting the fur until the small object slid free. He rolled it between his fingers, its weight far too heavy for something so small. Rex did not resist. Instead, the dog watched him closely, as if waiting for him to understand. Jack held the object to the light. It was a casing scuffed from weather, but intact enough to reveal a microport and the faint glint of circuitry within. The shape was familiar. He had seen this design not in civilian life, but overseas on patrols when intelligence officers passed along encrypted data under fire. His pulse tightened, memory flashing back to a desert night years ago. A convoy stalled and a young analyst pressing a similar chip into his palm with the words, "If we fall, this keeps moving." He turned the device over. Stamped faintly along its side were characters arranged in a pattern not random but structured strings of numbers and letters grouped in a format his training recognized immediately. This was not a tracking beacon. It was a transmitter, a courier of information. He exhaled slowly, conscious of the weight of what he held. He slid the casing open with careful pressure. Inside, nested beneath the circuit board, was a chip no larger than a fingernail. The etching along its edges was unmistakable, a cipher block used for intelligence transmissions, the kind designed to scramble sensitive data before relaying it across secure channels. Jack stared at it, the room falling into deeper silence around him. This was not equipment that strays would carry, nor something a child's missing pet would accidentally acquire. This meant the dogs had been used intentionally as carriers in operations that blurred the line between military and covert. He looked at Rex again, at the scar near his ear, at the way Duke held himself like a soldier at post. These animals had been trained with purpose, far beyond obedience. Emily stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, her hand tightening on Rex's fur, as if anchoring herself. Jack slipped the device into his pocket, his mind turning over possibilities with the precision of someone accustomed to weighing threats against survival. If a trained intruder had come tonight, and if that intruder knew the dogs carried this, then the cabin was not a chance refuge. It was a target. He leaned back into the shadows of the chair, staring at the ceiling beams where frost formed faint lace. His memory drew him back to a deployment in the mountains overseas, where encrypted bursts carried coordinates that shifted battles. He had once escorted handlers moving dogs like these through terrain mined with suspicion. He remembered their silence, their discipline, the way their eyes read danger before men did. He had not expected to meet that same gaze in a child's home in Minnesota. The storm's howl rose a reminder of distance from help. Jack reached for his notepad from his pack and began sketching the code groups he had seen etched into the casing. His pencil moved with certainty, each sequence sparking recognition. They aligned with a protocol he had seen used only once during an intelligence recovery mission 2 years earlier, a mission compromised by betrayal within their own ranks. He tapped the page, recalling the analyst's face in the desert, the urgency, the fear. The cipher was the same, which meant the chip now sitting in his pocket was not merely evidence. It was unfinished business that someone had crossed oceans to retrieve. He folded the page, tucked it under the chair, and pressed his hand against Rex's head. The dog leaned into it as though acknowledging the gravity of the discovery. Jack whispered, "You've been carrying this a long way, haven't you, boy?" Rex's ears flicked, his gaze steady, unwavering. Jack looked at Duke, who shifted closer, pressing his weight against the doorframe as though to seal it. These were not coincidences. They were signs. Emily's breathing steadied back into deep sleep, the innocence of a child who had no notion that her companions carried a world's worth of secrets. Jack sat through the hours until the clock marked 2, his mind drawing maps of who could have known who might still be searching, and what it would mean if they arrived before dawn. The wind lessened slightly, the storm preparing to break, but Jack knew storms rarely left without leaving something behind. He closed his eyes briefly, not to rest, but to recall every detail of the code, every precedent it implied. When he opened them again, the cabin seemed smaller, the walls thinner, the stakes higher. The dogs had brought more than warmth into this house. They had brought a thread tied to battles far beyond these woods. Jack Turner straightened, jaw set. Tomorrow the questions would begin, but tonight his duty was clear: hold the line until morning. The storm broke at last, just before sunrise, leaving the woods drowned in silence, branches sagging with heavy snow, the world outside looking deceptively clean. Jack Turner had spent the long night near the window, one hand never far from the flashlight, the other near the improvised barricade he had built at the back door. Emily woke slowly, rubbing her eyes, and asked if morning had truly come, her small voice fragile with both hope and weariness. Jack assured her it had, though his gaze never left the tree line. It was not long before the faint hum of engines rolled across the snow and red-blue lights painted the edges of the cabin walls. Emily pressed against Rex's shoulder as the flashing beams cut across the window, and Duke shifted forward, his tail rigid, but still his posture neither relief nor alarm, only assessment. Jack exhaled once low, telling himself that law enforcement arriving could mean safety, though in his gut he knew men could wear uniforms and still carry shadows. The knock on the door came sharp, professional, and Jack answered with his voice first asking for identification. A clear reply came: county police responding to an emergency call routed when the storm cleared the lines. Jack opened the door with caution, one hand keeping Rex back. 3 officers stood on the porch, their coats heavy with frost, their posture straightforward. Behind them, a 4th figure emerged, tall, wearing the longer coat of a detective. He carried himself with the easy authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. Emily stayed close to Rex, her small hand clutching his collar. The officers entered with practiced care, checking windows and corners, noting the broken latch at the back. Their leader spoke in a calm voice, assuring Emily they were there to protect her. She nodded, though her eyes remained wary. Then something shifted. The detective stepped across the threshold, brushing snow from his shoulders, and in that instant, both Rex and Duke went rigid. A deep growl rumbled from Duke, low and resonant, a warning that carried weight. Rex stood, hackles rising, placing himself between Emily and the man. The officers froze, surprised by the sudden change, their hands twitching toward holsters but not drawing. Easy One murmured, but the dogs ignored him, their eyes locked on the detective. Emily whispered the dogs' names, trying to soothe them, but they refused to settle, their bodies taut with instinct. Jack's eyes narrowed. Dogs with this level of training did not react without cause. He studied the man carefully. The detective's expression flickered just for a heartbeat, not quite surprise, not quite irritation, but something that looked like recognition. He quickly smoothed it away, addressing the room in measured tones, asking questions about the intruder, about the noises in the night. The officers began taking statements, but Jack remained quiet, his mind sifting memory. He had seen this face before, not in person, but in grainy photographs, stapled to classified files. During training, military security had drilled recruits on names associated with threats, men who had crossed lines, who had deserted or turned their skills to darker causes. Jack remembered a briefing years ago about internal investigations into a Marine unit compromised by a missing operative. The name had been Ryan Cole. Jack looked again at the detective's badge, catching the engraved name Cole. The cold inside him was not from the storm. He studied every gesture, the way Cole's eyes moved not around the cabin but at the dogs, the way his hand brushed the inside of his coat, as though checking more than just a notebook. Jack realized this was no coincidence. Cole had been flagged as connected to deserter investigations, and now he stood inside this cabin where two dogs with military bearing carried secrets inside their collars. Jack masked his recognition instead, offering minimal answers while watching carefully. He noticed how Cole asked about the dogs more than about Emily, and how his eyes hardened when he saw the broken clasp Jack had set on the mantel. Rex's growl deepened. Duke's ears pricked forward, their instincts declaring what they could not say. Emily clutched Rex tighter, whispering that they were good dogs, confused why the officers seemed unsettled. Jack gently touched her shoulder and told her it was all right, though his tone carried layers she could not hear. The officers finished their sweep, reporting forced entry at the back prints blurred by new snow, nothing else left behind. Cole nodded, his expression unreadable, then offered reassurances that they would increase patrols in the area. His eyes lingered on the dogs once more before turning away. Jack's pulse steadied into decision. The man standing in his living room was not just law enforcement. He was a thread tied to old betrayals, a shadow from past files. The dogs knew it. Jack knew it. And Emily, though too young to name it, felt the tension in the room. As the officers prepared to leave, Cole's voice lingered like smoke, promising to check back later. The words were polite. The tone was something else. Jack closed the door behind them, sliding the chain back with deliberate precision. Emily asked if the police would keep them safe. Jack looked at Rex and Duke, their eyes still locked on the door where Cole had gone, their bodies taut with warning. He answered, "We'll keep each other safe." His voice was steady, but inside he carried the knowledge that danger had now stepped through the front door in the guise of authority. The morning stretched pale and brittle after the storm sunlight spilling across fields that looked untouched except for the prints Jack Turner had already memorized. Emily sat at the table, clutching a cup of warm milk Rex beneath her chair, Duke by the door, their presence steady anchors in the fragile calm. Jack brewed black coffee in the dented percolator he had found in the cupboard, his movements deliberate, his thoughts replaying every second of the detective's visit. The tension had not left the air when a second knock sounded. This time Ryan Cole returned with only one uniformed officer at his side. His voice carried an edge of practiced authority as he stepped into the cabin once more, commenting on how restless the dogs appeared. Jack stayed silent, letting the man speak, his focus on Cole's eyes rather than his words. It was Emily who broke the stillness when Cole bent slightly and said that for everyone's safety it might be best to relocate the dogs to the station. He explained that if there were intruders targeting the house, the animals could become a distraction or even get hurt. Emily's chair scraped sharply against the wood as she stood, her hands tight on Rex's collar. "They stay here," she said with a courage that seemed larger than her small frame. Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. Rex pressed closer, Duke's ears flicking at the rise in her tone. Cole smiled thinly, insisting that it was only temporary, that trained animals belonged in secure facilities during investigations. Jack stepped forward, then his voice firm, his stance unyielding. "They stay," he said, aligning himself with the girl without hesitation. The officer beside Cole shifted awkwardly, sensing the weight of Jack's certainty. For a long moment, Cole's expression flickered between persuasion and irritation, but the dog's low growls rumbled again, cutting the silence like drawn wire. Finally, Cole raised his hands in concession, telling Emily they could remain for now, but reminding her that safety required cooperation. Emily did not answer, only buried her face in Rex's fur, her shoulders trembling with both fear and relief. When Cole left his boots crunching into the snow outside, Jack followed to the door, watching until the man's dark coat disappeared beyond the trees. He closed the door with slow precision, every muscle in his body taut with the sense that trust had been tested and found wanting. Hours passed. Jack used the time to fortify the house, further moving furniture to block weaker entry points, setting lanterns by the windows in case the power lines failed again. Emily helped where she could, her small hands carrying pieces of wood, her face pale but determined. The dogs shadowed each step, silent and vigilant. The afternoon sun slid low when word came from a deputy who returned without Cole. The man explained that Cole had left earlier, claiming he was investigating leads, but his car had been found abandoned on a service road less than 2 miles away. The deputy spoke carefully, but Jack caught the unease in his voice. He volunteered to check the vehicle himself and asked permission to bring Emily and the dogs with him, not wanting them left alone in the cabin. The deputy agreed, and soon they drove the narrow, snow-packed road until the dark outline of Cole's sedan came into view. Its doors locked, the windshield frosted over. Jack stepped out first, scanning the perimeter, then gestured for the deputy to unlock it. Inside the car lay objects that told a story too loud to ignore. In the trunk, beneath a folded tarp, rested military-grade rifles wrapped in oilcloth, their serial numbers filed off. On the passenger seat lay a phone still lit with messages on the screen. The deputy swore under his breath at the sight, but Jack's silence was heavier. He lifted the device, carefully scrolling through coded contacts that were not police dispatch numbers but identifiers linked to cartel aliases he had heard whispered during briefings overseas. Messages referenced movements of shipments, mentions of ports routes, and cover provided by someone inside law enforcement. Jack handed the phone to the deputy, his eyes hard. "You need to call this in to your captain." Quietly, he said, before word spreads to the wrong ears. The deputy's face tightened as he nodded, recognizing the enormity of what they had uncovered. Emily stood by the vehicle, Rex pressed against her side. Duke stationed ahead of them, scanning the tree line. She asked why the detective would leave guns and phones behind if he was supposed to help them. Jack crouched to her level, his eyes steady, his voice calm. "Sometimes people wear the right uniform for the wrong reasons," he said. "That's why we trust what we see, not just what we hear." Emily held tighter to Rex, her small face clouded with confusion and betrayal. Jack rose, knowing the discovery changed everything. The storm outside had passed, but a darker storm was moving closer, one tied to betrayal, to corruption, to men who had traded loyalty for profit. Cole's car was more than evidence. It was a signal that the threats against them had roots in both the underworld and the badge. As the deputy radioed in, his voice low and controlled, Jack scanned the woods. He felt the weight of the device in his pocket, the encoded chip from Rex's collar, and realized with grim clarity that the same forces chasing those codes were tied to the man who had just stood in their living room. The danger was no longer hidden. It had a face, a name, and proof now lay in plain sight. Jack Turner knew the discovery inside Ryan Cole's abandoned car could not be ignored, but he also knew evidence alone would not stop what was coming. The deputy had taken the rifle serial numbers and the cartel-linked phone back to headquarters, promising a quiet report to a trusted captain. Jack, however, carried something heavier in his pocket. The microchip from Rex's collar, a silent key that he suspected could explain why trained men and corrupted law enforcement were converging on this remote cabin. That evening, when Emily finally slept in the safety of the loft with Rex and Duke guarding the ladder, Jack unfolded his portable satellite communicator, a battered but functional device he carried for deployments. He angled its antenna toward a break in the clouds and secured the encrypted channel he had memorized years before. A voice answered after 2 tones clipped cautious. It belonged to Captain Harris, a former intelligence officer now assigned to secure logistics within the Marine Corps. Harris trusted Jack from a joint mission overseas and knew he would not reach out without reason. Jack kept his voice level as he explained what he had found: the broken clasp, the chip, the attempted intrusion, and the detective whose name matched records of a Marine deserter. Harris instructed him to transmit the chip's data through the secure channel. Jack inserted the device into the port on his communicator, his heart thudding with recognition when the screen lit with encrypted streams. The signal lagged through the storm's residue, but the transmission completed. Harris went silent on the other end, then returned with a voice harder, heavier. "Jack, this isn't just field chatter," Harris said. "This is procurement data. Someone's been funneling weapons out of our supply chains. And the recipient tags, they aren't random cartels. These are coordinated shipments." Jack's grip tightened on the communicator as Harris scrolled through, reading aloud coded designations that referred to specific depots and armories, the kind Jack had passed through during his own assignments. Each entry represented crates of rifles, ammunition, or explosives, siphoned away from official manifests and redirected into hands willing to pay. The names attached to these diversions were not aliases of criminals, but identifiers of military personnel responsible for oversight. Jack listened, his jaw clenched as Harris decoded further. The pattern showed sustained theft, months of coordination and cover that reached higher than enlisted men. Jack asked for the personnel list. Harris hesitated, then warned him to brace himself. One by one, Harris read names, some Jack recognized from past deployments. Men who had once sat at the same tables, shared the same rations, sworn the same oaths. Jack's pulse steadied, even as his chest burned each name another cut. Then Harris said a name that hollowed him out completely. Major Stephen Caldwell. The room seemed to still around Jack, the fire shrinking to a glow, the winter silence pressing through the walls. Caldwell had been his commanding officer during his first combat tour, a man Jack had respected, a man who had taught him the principles of duty and responsibility. Caldwell had been the one to write letters to families of fallen Marines, his voice steady even in grief. To see his name tied to shipments feeding cartels felt like betrayal on a scale Jack struggled to absorb. He asked Harris to repeat it, and Harris did with regret, heavy in his tone. "Jack, his clearance gives him reach over multiple depots. If Caldwell is compromised, this operation goes deeper than we feared." Jack's thoughts ran cold. He remembered nights Caldwell had stood beside him offering guidance, steadying younger Marines. He remembered his words about loyalty, about protecting those who could not protect themselves. Now those memories clashed with evidence of corruption and greed. Emily stirred above in the loft, murmuring in her sleep, unaware of the storm of revelation below. Rex lifted his head eyes on Jack, as though sensing the shift in his breathing. Jack lowered his voice, speaking into the communicator with deliberate calm. "If Caldwell's involved, then Cole is not working alone. He's here for the chip because it ties shipments back to command. Harris, if they realize the chip has been compromised, they'll come for it and for anyone who knows." Harris confirmed his fear. "You need to keep it secure. Don't trust local channels. I'll escalate to a restricted line, but if Caldwell has influence, some responses could be delayed or intercepted." Jack ended the call, his face set in lines of determination and betrayal. He slipped the communicator into his pack and checked his sidearm, though he knew the weight of truth was heavier than any weapon. He paced the cabin, slowly scanning the perimeter again, his mind dividing between protecting Emily and confronting a conspiracy stretching from their snow-buried refuge to the highest levels of his own command. He paused at the window, watching the pale moon over the treetops. Somewhere out there, men aligned with Cole and shielded by Caldwell's authority would be closing in, not just to reclaim a device, but to erase the only witnesses who knew it existed. Jack's resolve hardened. He had seen betrayal before, but never this close, never wearing the name of someone he had once saluted. Now he understood that this was not only about survival, it was about exposing a rot that threatened to hollow out the very institution he had dedicated his life to. He looked back at Emily, safe in her sleep with Rex and Duke guarding her. He whispered to himself, a vow carried in the old words of the Corps, "No man left behind. No truth buried." The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers when Jack Turner returned to the communicator after hours of restless thought. He waited until Emily's soft breathing assured him she was still asleep. Rex and Duke curled protectively near her. Jack switched the channel back to Captain Harris, who answered with the same controlled tone as before. "I ran deeper scans on the encrypted files you sent," Harris said. "There's more than supply chain data in that chip. Whoever embedded this wanted leverage, not just proof of stolen weapons." Jack asked what else he had found. His voice low, his chest tight. Harris hesitated before replying. "There are profiles attached to logistics shipments. Civilians used as couriers under cartel direction. It looks like coercion. Threats. People forced to transport materials under the guise of personal errands." Jack stiffened as Harris read a name that froze him in place. Sarah Mitchell. The syllables hit him like a strike. He repeated the name, his mind struggling to process. Harris confirmed. "Yes. She's listed as a temporary courier. Date stamp puts her 3 weeks before her reported accident. Jack, she's marked as non-affiliated civilian. That means she wasn't working with them voluntarily." Jack's stomach churned. Emily's mother, the woman the girl still cried for some nights, had been recorded in the cartel's system. Her supposed fatal accident was not just a tragedy of ice and weather, but a loose end tied off by men who feared exposure. Jack forced himself to breathe steadily. He asked Harris to send confirmation. A packet of metadata arrived on his screen containing route logs, shipment tags, and identifiers. It showed Sarah Mitchell was registered as moving a package along a corridor notorious for cartel activity, her profile tagged with a red marker that Harris explained meant expendable. Jack rubbed a hand across his face, struggling against the rush of anger. He remembered the way Emily's eyes dimmed when she asked about her mother. He remembered the silence in her father's photograph left on the mantel. And now the truth unraveled. Sarah had been forced, not complicit. Jack pieced it together aloud, his voice rough. She must have been threatened. They used her as a mule, knowing she had family isolated up here. She didn't choose it. They cornered her. Harris agreed. These files suggest coercion. It's a tactic cartels use when they want cover. Families are targeted. Safety is used as leverage. And if she refused, the outcome is usually final. Jack's pulse pounded with clarity. The accident that had stolen Emily's mother had not been chance. It had been deliberate. Her life had been collateral in a network of betrayal that extended from corrupted officers like Caldwell to cartel operatives who erased anyone who might expose their chain of supply. Jack thanked Harris and ended the call, shutting the communicator with a snap. He sat in silence, his fists tightening until Rex whined softly and pressed his head against Jack's knee. Duke shifted closer as though sensing the weight of the discovery. Jack rose and paced to the loft ladder, looking at Emily's sleeping face, her innocence fragile against the storm of secrets pressing against them. He knew he could not tell her yet, not until safety was assured. But he also knew he carried the responsibility to uncover the truth completely for Sarah's memory and for Emily's future. He thought back to Major Caldwell's betrayal and now saw how it intertwined with Sarah's coerced role. Caldwell's logistics access, Cole's presence as a corrupted detective, and Sarah's forced courier assignment were strands of the same web. Jack whispered to himself, "They made her carry it. She didn't belong in this. They killed her to cover their tracks." His mind replayed the moment Harris had said the word expendable. It stabbed at him, the coldness of it, the bureaucratic marking of a mother as disposable because she had glimpsed too much. Jack's decision solidified. The cartel had silenced Sarah, but they had not silenced the evidence she carried. That chip was her voice now, and it would not be buried. Hours later, when dawn light seeped pale through the frosted windows, Emily descended the ladder, rubbing her eyes. She found Jack standing at the table map spread across its surface, the chip and communicator beside them. "You didn't sleep?" she said softly. Jack forced a small smile. "Not much." She reached to pet Rex, who wagged his tail. Then she looked at Jack's expression, searching. "You found something, didn't you?" He crouched to meet her eyes, steadying his voice. I found out that your mom was braver than anyone realized. She got caught in something dangerous, and she tried to protect you." Emily's lip trembled, her small hand clutching Rex's fur. "She didn't just leave us." Jack shook his head firmly. "No, she loved you too much. What happened wasn't her choice." Emily nodded slowly, tears welling but a flicker of relief passing through her features. She leaned into Rex for comfort, whispering into his fur. Jack rose again, looking through the window at the snow still heavy on the trees. He knew what the next step had to be: uncover the full network, expose Caldwell, and dismantle the chain that had forced Sarah into her fate. He pressed his palm against the cold glass, his reflection lined with resolve. In that moment, he silently promised Emily that he would not let Sarah's truth vanish into silence. The snow had begun to settle again, soft flakes drifting through the darkened pines when Jack Turner noticed the faint reflection of headlights weaving slowly along the road below. He froze near the window, careful not to let the light inside betray his position. Rex stirred at his side ears, pricked forward, and Duke let out a low growl from the foot of the stairs. Emily had already been tucked into bed with a blanket piled high around her shoulders, but the dogs sensed what Jack's instincts confirmed: someone was out there. Jack moved quietly to the door, checked the magazine of his sidearm, and slipped into his boots. He gestured to Rex and Duke with a sharp hand signal he had not used since his time in the Corps, and both dogs immediately assumed formation beside him. Outside, the night was bone cold, each breath hanging like smoke. The lights grew closer, until the shape of a black SUV came into view, crawling past the tree line as if measuring distance to the cabin. Jack waited until the vehicle slowed, then he stepped from the shadows, weapon raised, the dogs flanking him in silence. The SUV jerked to a halt, its engine idling heavily, the driver's silhouette just visible. Jack called out, his voice steady, commanding the occupant to step out. No response came, only the idle growl of the machine. Rex lunged forward, barking sharply, Duke following with a snarl that cut through the frozen quiet. The driver panicked and fled on foot into the woods, the crunch of boots fading quickly into the distance. Jack resisted the urge to pursue. The priority was the vehicle itself. He approached cautiously, sweeping his flashlight across the interior. What he saw froze him. The back seats were piled with crates marked with stenciled codes he recognized immediately: U.S. military property. Rifles wrapped in canvas cases of ammunition, even tactical vests lay in the shadows. But worse than the weapons was the folder he found on the passenger seat. He flipped it open to reveal a neatly typed list of names. His heart sank as he read the first two entries: Emily Davis, Jack Turner. The dogs pressed close as if sensing the weight of the discovery. He turned another page and felt his chest tighten further. Tucked inside the folder was a photograph, a unit picture taken years ago during his overseas deployment. He saw himself standing among his squad, a rare moment of camaraderie captured in the desert sun. But someone had taken a pen to the photo, circling his face in red ink, marking him like prey. Jack clenched the photo in his hand, the weight of betrayal pressing down. Whoever was behind this knew not just his name, but his history, his past, his brothers in arms. This was not random intimidation. It was personal. He gathered the documents quickly, securing them inside his jacket. Then he scanned the woods with his flashlight, searching for movement, but the forest swallowed all sound. He returned to the cabin, bolting the door behind him. Emily was still asleep, her breathing steady. Jack sat at the table under the dim glow of a lantern, spreading the evidence before him. Rex lay at his feet, his head on Jack's boot, while Duke remained alert near the door, growling softly each time the wind rattled the shutters. Jack studied the names on the target list. There were others besides him and Emily, names he recognized from old rosters, men he had trained with, some he had not spoken to in years. It meant the reach of this operation extended further than he had feared. It meant that whatever secrets Major Caldwell had been guarding, they involved more than weapons smuggling. They involved tying off every loose thread, every man who might recall details from deployment that now threatened to surface. Jack leaned back, his jaw tightening as he turned the photo over in his hand. The circle around his face was a message: you are being hunted. He thought of Sarah Mitchell, marked as expendable in the cartel files. Her life ended when she became inconvenient. Now Emily's name sat beside his on a kill list, and he knew the same ruthless logic applied. He would not let it happen. He rose and checked the locks again, then stowed the folder and photo in a secure case. The dogs followed him to the loft, watching as he settled into a chair near Emily's bed. He did not sleep that night. His mind replayed the image of the SUV, the military crates, the list, and the photograph scarred by red ink. Each detail hardened his resolve. He had spent his life as a Marine facing threats abroad, but now the war had come home, and the line he needed to hold was at this very cabin. At dawn, when Emily awoke and stretched under her blankets, she saw him still seated in the chair, eyes heavy but sharp. Rex and Duke standing guard, as if they too had not rested. She asked quietly if something was wrong. Jack managed a calm tone. Nothing you need to worry about right now, but we'll need to be careful from here on. Emily nodded, sensing more than he said, and pressed her face into Rex's fur for comfort. Jack looked out at the pale morning light spilling across the snow and made a silent promise: if they wanted to hunt him, then they would discover he was not easy prey. Jack Turner drove into town at first light, the evidence from the SUV locked in the back of his truck. Emily stayed behind with Mrs. Thompson, who had agreed to watch over her for a few hours, though Rex and Duke refused to leave Jack's side. Their loyalty was fierce, and he trusted their instincts more than most people's. At the veterinary clinic, Jack carried both dogs inside for a checkup, using the pretense of routine care. Dr. Mason, a seasoned veterinarian with military contracts, agreed to run blood tests and scans discreetly. Jack waited in the examination room, his thoughts circling the SUV's discovery and the photo with his face circled in red. Dr. Mason returned after an hour, his expression grave. He placed 2 files on the table and looked Jack directly in the eye. "You need to sit down for this," he said. Jack's chest tightened as Mason opened the first file. The larger one, Rex. His DNA matches records from a microchip that was flagged as missing 2 years ago. He isn't just any dog, Jack. He's the same pup that belonged to Emily Davis's family. Someone took him, wiped the chip, and reconditioned him. Jack stared at Rex, who was sitting calmly beside Emily's worn scarf that Jack had brought along. The scar on his ear, the way he responded to Emily's touch, it all made sense now. Rex had been stolen from the Davis family, trained under cartel or corrupted military programs, and somehow found his way back. Jack whispered, "He came home." Dr. Mason nodded, then tapped the second file. And Duke. His results came back too. He's not just a stray either. His chip registered once under Marine Corps records. He was part of a K-9 unit assigned to your division overseas. His handler filed him missing in action during a failed raid. Jack's memory surged fragments of heat smoke and chaos from a mission that had gone wrong. He remembered the handler shouting Duke's name in the din, then silence. Everyone assumed the dog was lost. Yet here he was, scarred but alive somehow, funneled into the same dark system that had taken Rex. Jack's throat tightened. 2 dogs, 2 different paths, both stolen by forces that erased them from rightful lives and molded them into tools. And now they were back, united by chance or fate, guarding the same child and soldier who needed them most. Jack pressed his hand against Duke's thick fur, feeling the steadiness of the animal's presence. "They're not just dogs," he murmured. "They're survivors of the same betrayal we're fighting." Dr. Mason lowered his voice. "This isn't coincidence, Jack. Someone has been taking animals with military potential, repurposing them. The overlap between cartel operations and corrupted channels in the Corps, it's wider than we thought. These 2 are proof." Jack left the clinic with the files sealed tight, his mind heavy with the revelations. In the truck, he sat behind the wheel staring at Rex and Duke in the rearview mirror. Emily's laughter echoed in his thoughts, the way she clung to Rex like she had found a piece of her mother again. Now he knew the truth, and he would have to tell her carefully. When he returned to the cabin, Emily ran out to greet them, Rex bounding ahead to nuzzle her cheek. She looked up at Jack, sensing something different in his eyes. "What did you find out?" she asked softly. Jack crouched to meet her at eye level. Rex pressed close between them. "Rex isn't just any dog," Jack said, his voice steady but gentle. "He's yours. The same puppy your family lost. Someone took him, trained him, but he found his way back to you." Emily gasped, tears springing to her eyes. She wrapped her arms around Rex's neck, whispering, "I knew it. I knew you'd come back." The dog wagged his tail and pressed into her embrace as if to confirm it. Jack placed a hand on Duke's back. "And Duke, he was once part of my unit. I thought I lost him years ago, but he survived. He's been through battles just like I have." Emily reached to stroke Duke, her small hand trembling. "So they're both ours now," she said. Jack nodded, though he knew the truth was more complicated. They belonged to history, to scars left by corruption and war, but here in this moment, they were family. That night, as the fire crackled, Jack reviewed the files again by lantern light. He connected the dots the cartel had taken. Animals trained them, perhaps even embedded them with technology, like the chip found in Rex's collar. Sarah Mitchell's forced role, Major Caldwell's betrayal, Ryan Cole's presence as a corrupted detective, and now the stolen K9s, all pointed to a coordinated effort that blurred the line between military resources and criminal networks. Jack looked at Emily asleep between the two dogs and felt the urgency deepen. The cartel had stolen too much already. Sarah's life, Rex's puppyhood, Duke's service, and the honor of the Corps itself. He swore to himself he would not let them take anything more. The wind had fallen silent after a night of steady howling, leaving the woods wrapped in the kind of stillness that carries its own warning. Jack Turner stood at the window, the files about Rex and Duke still spread across the table, his mind racing with the truth that had unfolded over the past 2 days. He felt a heaviness in his chest, the certainty that the storm of secrets was reaching its breaking point. Rex lifted his head, a soft growl rising in his throat. Duke stood, hackles, bristling eyes locked on the door. Jack turned sharply, sensing it even before the sound of boots crunched on the snow outside. The door creaked open without a knock. A man stepped inside, his silhouette filling the doorway with the cold behind him. It was Detective Ryan Cole, though Jack now saw him not as an officer of the law, but as the man from his past, a Marine who had stood beside him in deserts half a world away. Cole's pistol was already leveled, his expression sharp with bitterness. "You always got the recognition," he said, his voice hard. "The commendations, the command's trust, and me just the shadow. Tonight it ends." His eyes flicked to Emily, who stood frozen near the stairs, clutching Rex's collar. In the instant of tension, Rex placed himself between the girl and the gun, while Duke edged closer to Jack, his muscles coiled for a strike. Jack raised his hand slowly, his tone calm but edged with steel. Cole put it down. "You don't have to do this." But Ryan's eyes burned with something too deep to reason away. "You think you deserve everything, Turner. You think you're the only one who can fight for what matters, but this time I take control." Jack's pulse hammered, yet he forced his breathing steady. He had already prepared for this. Hours earlier, he had triggered the emergency beacon embedded in the chip recovered from Rex's collar, transmitting their location to the military police. He only needed to buy enough time. Outside, faint at first, but growing, came the sound of sirens, their echo threading through the frozen trees. Cole stiffened his gaze, darting toward the window, uncertainty flashing in his eyes. "What did you do?" he snapped. Jack kept his voice even. "I gave them the truth, Ryan. They're coming, and it's over." Rage contorted the man's face. He swung the barrel back to Jack, finger tightening on the trigger. Time slowed. Emily gasped, clutching Rex tighter. The gun roared, but the shot never struck its mark. Rex launched forward with a sudden burst of power, slamming against Cole's arm and jerking the shot skyward. The bullet tore harmlessly into the ceiling. In the same breath, Duke surged in his weight, driving Cole backward, teeth snapping inches from the man's wrist as the pistol fell clattering to the floor. Jack moved without hesitation, grabbing the weapon and pressing Cole face down against the wood planks. Cole struggled, fury spilling from him, but Rex and Duke held their ground, one pinning his arm, the other blocking his every attempt to rise. Emily burst into tears, rushing forward to throw her arms around Rex. Through sobs, she whispered into his fur, "You came back to protect me, and you did." Her words steadied Jack more than any training ever had. He looked down at Cole, pinned and breathing hard, the sound of sirens now flashing red and blue across the frosted windows. Military police burst through the door, weapons drawn, their commanding voice ordering everyone to stand clear. Jack released Cole and stepped back as officers forced him to his feet, locking heavy cuffs around his wrists. Cole's protests echoed hollow in the small cabin, a mix of betrayal and denial, but they grew faint as he was dragged outside into the night. The lights painted the snow in streaks of crimson and sapphire, his figure swallowed by the glow of justice arriving too late, but not too late for Emily. Silence returned, broken only by Emily's quiet sobs. Jack knelt before her, brushing a tear from her cheek with a gloved hand. He managed the first real smile in days. "It's finished. You and your friends are safe now." Emily clung to Rex and looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Promise," she whispered. Jack nodded firmly. "I promise." The storm outside had broken, leaving only soft snow drifting gently to earth. The oppressive darkness seemed to lift with it. Emily slipped her small hand into Jack's, and together they stepped into the living room, where Duke settled heavily against the hearth. Rex curled protectively around Emily's legs. For the first time in years, the cabin no longer felt like a lonely refuge. It felt like a home. Jack sat back, watching Emily's laughter break through her tears as Rex nudged her playfully. The weight of betrayal, of secrets of war, all still lingered, but they no longer defined the night. Justice had begun, and healing could finally follow. Outside, the snow erased tracks of violence and fear, leaving the ground fresh, untouched, ready for tomorrow. Inside, by the warmth of the fire, family and loyalty reclaimed their place. And that's where tonight's story comes to an end. But I'd like to hear from you. Which moment struck you the most? The return of the lost dog, the betrayal inside the uniform, or the final stand in the cabin? Where are you watching this from? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the journey, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Your support keeps these stories alive.